Sacajawea, born 1788, died possibly in 1812. Follow along with me in your American Experience book beginning on page 107. Sacajawea, who accompanied you, Sacagawea's husband, that long, dangerous, and fatiguing route to the Pacific Ocean and back, deserved a greater reward for her attention and services on that route than we had in our power to give her at the Mandans. William Clark to Charbonneau in letters, August 20th, 1806. Very little is known about the American heroine, Sacajawea. She belonged to the Shoshone, meaning snake, tribe, although her name etymology is from the Hidatsa or Minotri tribe that kidnapped her when she was young. Sakaja, meaning bird, and Wea, meaning woman. Sacajawea accompanied Meriwether Lewis and William Clark on their expedition west, acting as their translator and guide. She spoke both Shoshone and Hidatsa, and her husband, Toussaint Charbonneau, also spoke French. From the journals of Lewis and Clark, we know that Sacajawea had an incredible memory, deeply loved her family, and possessed a strong constitution. She and her husband joined the famous expedition just a few months after she had given birth. When and where Sacajawea died is shrouded in mystery due to poor record keeping and the fact that she was often not called by name in accounts that may or may not feature her. Without a doubt, she played a vital part in the success and scope of Lewis and Clark's influential journey. The following is an excerpt from the article Bird Woman in the Dickinson Press newspaper, dated November 9th, 1907. Bird Woman. State of Wyoming places monument over remains of Sacajawea. In view of the fact that the Club of Women of North Dakota are raising a fund for the purpose of erecting a monument to Sacajawea, the Bird Woman, who was the guide from this vicinity to the Pacific coast of the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1803 to 1804, the proposal of the state of Wyoming to build a monument on her grave is a matter of interest here. At the last session of the Wyoming legislature, a bill was favorably considered providing for the erection of a monument to cost no less than $500 on the site of the burial place of Sacajawea, the Shoshone squaw who accompanied the Lewis and Clark expedition and who rendered invaluable service to the intrepid explorers. All that remains is to make certain of the exact burial place of Sacajawea. It seems to have been proven, however, that the Bird Woman is buried not far from Washakie, the present agency of the Shoshone tribe, and there are several old Indians who remember of Sacajawea and who have pointed out the pile of rocks that marks her last resting place. Sacajawea was not buried on a scaffold, but according to all the reliable testimony that has been gathered, the faithful squaw was given a Christian burial by her husband, a French scout, and the pile of rocks over her grave kept off the coyotes and wolves that infested the plains burying ground. Monument to her memory. When the state of North Dakota honors Sacajawea, the Bird Woman will have more monuments than had ever fallen to the lot of any squaw, not excepting Pocahontas. When the Lewis and Clark expedition was suggested, the part played by Sacajawea in the overland expedition of the white men aroused keen interest among the women of the United States. It was proposed by the women of Oregon to erect some memorial to the only woman of that history-making expedition, so Miss Alice Cooper, a Denver sculptor, was commissioned to evolve a suitable monument. The young sculptor evolved a work that has been pronounced a masterpiece and that awakens the admiration of the thousands of tourists who visit Portland. The squaw, with a papoose clinging at her back, is seen pointing at some distant object, just as the Lewis and Clark Journal describes the way in which she pointed out many a mountain pass that made travel easy for the explorers. While the memorial at the squaw's grave will not be so costly or imposing as the Portland Monument, it will at least afford an appropriate marking place for the grave of this remarkable woman. Her romantic career. Sacajawea had a most romantic experience, which appears in fragmentary chapters of the journals of Lewis and Clark. She was the wife of Charbonneau, who was picked up as a Minotri interpreter when the expedition reached that tribe. Sacajawea was a Snake or Shoshone Indian. She had been captured by raiding Minnetarees and had been sold as a slave to Charbonneau, who brought her up and later married her. When the expedition left the Minnetarees, Charbonneau and Sacajawea were taken along. The captains were fearful at their reception at the hands of the powerful Shoshones and desired someone to act as an interpreter when the tribe was reached. Sacajawea was taken along for this purpose. She had given birth to a child while the expedition was in the Minnetaree stronghold, but with customary Indian hardihood, the young mother faced all the perils and hardships of the journey. Sacagawea's meeting with her own people is thus described in the journal. On setting out at 7 o'clock, Captain Clark, with Charbonneau and his wife, walked on shore, but they had not gone more than a mile before the captain saw Sacajawea, who was with her husband 100 yards ahead, began to dance and show every mark of the most extravagant joy, turning around and pointing to several Indians, whom he now saw advancing on horseback, sucking her fingers at the same time to show that they were of her native tribe. We soon drew near the camp, and just as we approached, a woman made her way past the crowd to Sacajawea, and recognizing each other, they embraced one another with the most tender affection. The meeting of these two young women had in it something peculiarly touching, not only in the ardent manner in which their feelings were expressed, but from the real interest of the situation. They had been companions in childhood in the same battle with the Minnetarees, and they had been taken prisoners. They had shared the same rigors of captivity until one escaped from the Minnetarees with the scarce of a hope of seeing her friend released from the hand of her enemies. After a conference with the chief, Sacajawea was sent for as an interpreter, and the journal continues. She came into the tent and sat down and was beginning to interpret when, in the person of Chinnowait, she recognized her brother. She instantly jumped up and ran to embrace him, throwing her blanket over him and weeping profusely. The chief was himself moved, though not to the same degree. After some conversation between them, she resumed her seat and attempted to interpret for us, but her new situation seemed to overpower her, and she was frequently interrupted by her tears. After the council had finished, the unfortunate woman learned that all her family was dead, except two brothers, one of whom was absent, and a son of her elder sister, a small boy who was immediately adopted by her. The journal pays the highest tribute to the Shoshones as a nation. This powerful tribe, whose friendliness Lewis and Clark especially desired, might not have been so favorably disposed toward the adventurers had it not been for the young Snake woman who accompanied the expedition. But her work as an interpreter was only a small part of the service this remarkable young woman rendered Lewis and Clark. Time and time again, the journals pay tribute to her wonderful memory. As a child, she had wandered over much of the wilderness, which was then unknown to white men, and she seemed to remember every trail, every pass, and every landmark in the wild country through which the expedition traveled. More than once, the party would have been halted by apparently impassable barriers, but always Sacajawea came to the rescue and pointed out some pass through which she had traveled in childhood. After the separation of the party, Sacajawea proceeded with Captain Lewis along Clark River near Yellowstone. Here is one instance of her wonderful memory quoted from the journals. Along the roads, there were also some appearances of old buffalo paths and some old heads of buffaloes. And as these animals have wonderful sagacity in the choice of their routes, the coincidence of the buffalo with an Indian road was the strongest assurance that it was best. In the afternoon, we passed along the hillside north of the creek until, in the course of 6 miles, we entered an extensive level plain. Here the tracks of these Indians scattered, so we could no longer recognize them. But Sacajawea recognized the plain immediately. She had traveled it often in her childhood and informed us it was the great resort of the Shoshones, who came for the purpose of gathering quamash and cows and taking beaver, and that Glade Track was a branch of the Wisdom River, and that on reaching the higher part of the plain one should see a gap in the mountains on the course to our canoes, and from that gap a high point of mountain covered with snow. Struggling over dangerous mountain passes and shooting rapids in frail canoes, the party was always accompanied by Sacajawea. On the return of the expedition, Charbonneau and his wife decided to remain with the Shoshones. The interpreter was paid something like $500 for his services, but no record is made of paying Sacajawea. The squaw remained among her people to the last on the plains watered by the Wind River in Wyoming. Here the faithful bird woman died, and it is only fitting that her grave should be marked as the state of Wyoming proposes. Notes and important words. As this newspaper story suggests, the exact resting place of Sacajawea is a mystery. There is a grave for her in Wyoming, claiming that she died in 1884, and another grave in South Dakota, claiming that she died in 1812. Many reasons contribute to this confusion, but mainly the problem is that she is not always called by name in accounts that may or may not be talking about her. Washakie is located in the middle of Wyoming, and it's otherwise known as Fort Washakie. Sagacity, meaning foresight, discernment, wisdom.